The morning sun stretched its golden fingers through the massive glass windows of Everett Global, spilling light across the pristine marble floors. Celeste Harrington weaved through the maze of corridors, her heels clicking with urgency. Today was her first day as the company's lead translator, and instead of making a composed and professional entrance, she was already 10 minutes behind schedule. As if that wasn't enough, another discomfort gnawed at her. She desperately needed to find a restroom. Her eyes scanned the hall, and relief flooded her when she spotted a door with a sign that vaguely resembled a restroom symbol. Wasting no time, she pushed it open. The moment she stepped inside, something felt off. The air carried the faint scent of eucalyptus, and a soft symphony of classical music hummed through hidden speakers. Instead of sterile white tiles and a row of sinks, she was surrounded by dim lighting and an atmosphere of sheer indulgence. This wasn't a restroom. Her stomach dropped. Before she could turn back, the quiet murmur of running water stopped, and then he appeared. A tall, chiseled figure rounded the corner, a towel wrapped loosely around his waist, droplets of water gliding down his skin. Silas Everett, CEO of Everett Global. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world outside that room ceased to exist. Celeste's mind raced through 1,000 responses, yet not a single coherent word formed on her tongue. She had seen him before. His face graced company newsletters and investor reports, but no photograph had ever conveyed the sheer presence he carried in real life. His gaze, calm yet piercing, swept over her before he finally spoke. "This is a private executive spa." His voice was steady, not a hint of surprise lacing his words. "Would you care to explain why you're here?" Heat prickled at the back of her neck. "I thought this was a restroom," she blurted, mortified. "It's my first day, and I must have taken a wrong turn." She gestured weakly toward the door, struggling very hard to keep her eyes from trailing down past his collarbones. "The employee restrooms are 2 floors down," he replied, arching a brow. "This area is restricted." Her embarrassment deepened. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Everett." She rushed out. "I'm Celeste Harrington, the new lead translator. I was supposed to be at the morning briefing, but She hesitated, realizing she was rambling. Something in his gaze shifted, a flicker of recognition crossing his features. "Miss Harrington, from Geneva?" "Yes, sir," she confirmed, attempting a weak smile. "Though I doubt I'm making the best first impression." His lips pressed together as if weighing her words. Then, after a pause, he glanced at the clock on the wall. "Your briefing starts in 5 minutes. You might want to get moving." "Yes, right, of course." She pivoted toward the door, her escape plan in motion. But fate had other ideas. Her heel caught on the plush carpet. The world tilted. In a desperate attempt to steady herself, her hand shot out, landing squarely on his chest. Time slowed. Beneath her palm, she felt the solid warmth of his skin, the quick, rhythmic beat of his heart. His fingers wrapped around her elbow, instinctively catching her before she could fall any further. For one brief moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them crackled. Celeste swallowed hard. Sorry." Silas's hold lingered for a fraction of a second longer than necessary before he released her. His expression was unreadable. "Find the right floor, Miss Harrington." Without another word, she spun on her heel and practically bolted from the room, her heart hammering in her chest. Celeste withdrew her hand as if she had touched fire, her pulse hammering in her ears. "This is definitely not how I wanted to make my first impression." For the briefest moment, something flickered across Silas Everett's face. Amusement, maybe? But it was gone so fast, she wasn't sure if she had imagined it. "No, I suppose it wasn't," he replied, his tone measured. "We'll discuss your questionable sense of direction another time, Miss Harrington. For now, you have a meeting to get to." Celeste didn't need to be told twice. She nodded stiffly and all but bolted from the room, her face burning with humiliation. By some miracle, she managed to find her way to the correct floor and slipped into the meeting room, hoping no one would notice her flushed cheeks. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on the presentation, one thing became abundantly clear: her time at Everett Global was going to be far from ordinary. What she didn't see was Silas watching her retreating figure, a contemplative expression settling over his features. For the first time in years, something had managed to break through the carefully controlled exterior he had spent a lifetime maintaining. Whether that was a good thing remained to be seen. The following week proved that Silas Everett had not forgotten their awkward first encounter. If anything, he seemed determined to remind her of it. Just not with words. Celeste barely had time to settle into her new role before she found herself buried under an avalanche of demanding tasks. Each assignment was more complex than the last, and it didn't take long for her to realize that this was deliberate. Silas was testing her, pushing her limits, as if waiting for her to crack under the pressure. By Monday morning, the challenge escalated. A thick stack of contracts landed on her desk, accompanied by a terse note written in his precise, almost annoyingly perfect handwriting. Complete by noon. No errors. Celeste exhaled slowly, flipping through the pages. These weren't just standard contracts. They were intricate legal agreements written in German, Mandarin, and Arabic. Translating them wasn't just about converting words. It required cultural adaptation, industry-specific knowledge, and meticulous attention to detail. If this was meant to intimidate her, it wouldn't work. Straightening her shoulders, she rolled up her sleeves and got to work. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, carefully parsing through every clause, ensuring accuracy and nuance. She double-checked industry terms, cross-referenced legal frameworks, and refined phrasing to maintain both precision and clarity. By 11:55 a.m., she stood outside Silas's office, translations in hand. She knocked once before stepping inside. He looked up from his computer, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. So quick, she almost missed it. "You're early," he noted, taking the stack from her. "I allowed time for review," Celeste replied evenly, though inside her heart pounded under his scrutiny. Silas flipped through the documents, scanning them with the sharp precision of someone who expected to find errors. His expression grew increasingly tense as he didn't. Finally, he set the papers down, his gaze locking onto hers. "Your technical skills match your credentials," he admitted, "but let's see how you perform under real pressure." The next day, he made good on that promise. Celeste barely had time to sip her morning coffee before she was thrust into a live video conference with Japanese investors. No briefing, no notes, just an expectation to translate complex financial discussions in real time. She didn't flinch. Even when Silas, deliberately, she suspected, began weaving in obscure industry jargon, testing her, she met every challenge head-on, seamlessly keeping up with the fast-paced negotiations. And so it continued. Silas made a habit of dropping urgent documents on her desk just as she was about to leave for the day. He scheduled last-minute meetings, forcing her to translate hours of technical discussions with little to no preparation. And every time he observed her reaction, watching as if waiting for her to falter. But she didn't. Celeste didn't just survive. She thrived. Her sharp mind and adaptability didn't go unnoticed. Other executives quickly took note of how effortlessly she could switch between languages, maintaining the exact meaning of complex negotiations while smoothing over cultural differences. One particular afternoon, during a critical meeting with German investors, Silas experienced something unexpected. He listened as Celeste translated his words, but not verbatim. She subtly refined them, adding context, preemptively adjusting phrasing to avoid potential misunderstandings. She wasn't just repeating what he said, she was improving it. For the first time, Silas found himself watching her with something other than scrutiny. And for the first time, Celeste realized she was proving herself, not just to him, but to everyone in the room. After the meeting, Celeste barely had time to settle at her desk before a message arrived, summoning her to Silas Everett's office. She braced herself. Another impossible task, no doubt. But when she stepped inside, she found him standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, his usual sharp, impenetrable expression replaced by something thoughtful. "You adjusted my phrasing during the meeting," he said, turning toward her. His tone wasn't accusatory, merely observant. Celeste met his gaze evenly. "I adapted it for cultural context," she clarified. "A direct translation would have come across as too blunt to German investors. I made sure the message remained the same, just more effective." For a second, she swore she saw the faintest trace of a smile curve his lips. Most translators wouldn't take that kind of initiative. Before she could stop herself, she replied, "Most translators haven't accidentally walked in on their boss in a private spa." Silence. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. a deep, genuine sound that momentarily stripped away the carefully constructed walls around him. Celeste barely hid her shock. Silas Everett laughs? For the briefest moment, she saw something different in him, someone younger, far less severe than the man his reputation suggested. "You continue to surprise me, Miss Harrington," he murmured, his voice lower, almost amused. Their eyes met, and that same undercurrent of tension from their first encounter sparked between them. Celeste felt it like a live wire. The way his shirt framed his broad shoulders, the subtle gold flecks in his otherwise dark eyes, the faint scent of his cologne, details she had been trying very hard to ignore. The moment shattered when his phone rang. Just like that, his business persona snapped back into place. Without another word, he turned to answer the call. Taking it as her cue to leave, Celeste reached for the door. But before she could step out, his voice stopped her. "Miss Harrington." She turned. "Yes?" A pause. Then simply, "Good work today." The words were straightforward, almost indifferent. But coming from him, they carried more weight than she expected. As she walked back to her desk, she realized something. Silas's challenges weren't just about testing her abilities. They were his way of keeping people at a distance. The question was, how long could he keep up the act when she kept exceeding every expectation he threw at her? The answer would come sooner than either of them anticipated, and it would change everything. The Everett Global Annual Charity Gala had transformed the corporate headquarters into a dazzling spectacle. Crystal chandeliers spilled golden light across the marble floors, while the air hummed with classical music and the soft murmur of conversation. Industry leaders, investors, and foreign dignitaries floated between elegantly decorated tables, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries. Standing near the refreshment table, Celeste adjusted the strap of her midnight blue evening gown, feeling slightly out of place. Her role tonight was simple: assist with international guests. So far, that meant a lot of standing around. She let her gaze drift across the room, inevitably landing on Silas. He moved through the crowd with effortless grace, conversing smoothly with one group before transitioning to the next. He wore a tailored black tuxedo that only seemed to amplify his presence. But despite his composed exterior, she noticed the tension in his shoulders. Then, something shifted. Waiters emerged with trays of champagne weaving through the crowd. Celeste watched closely as one approached Silas, offering a glass. His reaction was so subtle most wouldn't have noticed. The almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw, the way his knuckles whitened around his water glass. A fraction of a second later, he stepped away from the conversation entirely and slipped out onto the balcony. Celeste hesitated. Then, before she even understood why, she followed. A cool breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine from the corporate gardens below. Silas stood by the railing, his back to her, posture rigid. His breathing was controlled, but there was something about the way he held himself that told her. This wasn't just about not liking champagne. Something was wrong. And for the first time, Celeste found herself wanting to know why. Silas's breathing was slightly uneven, his grip firm around the railing. He didn't turn when Celeste approached, but she knew he had sensed her presence. "You should be inside," he murmured, his voice rougher than usual. "There might be guests who need translation." "They can wait," she replied gently. She moved to stand beside him, keeping a respectful distance. The night air was crisp, carrying the soft scent of jasmine from the gardens below. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Then, carefully, she asked, "What is it about champagne?" Silas turned sharply, surprise flashing across his features, followed by something else, something closer to fear. "You noticed that?" "I notice a lot of things about you," she admitted. "It's part of my job to read people, to understand what isn't being said." Silas didn't respond right away. The silence stretched between them so long that Celeste thought he might not answer at all. But then his voice came distant, like a memory pulled from somewhere he rarely allowed himself to visit. 5 years ago, I was at a gala, much like this one. My wife Isabel was there. So was our daughter, Elena. His hands clenched around the railing. We were celebrating a major acquisition. Everyone had champagne. I was giving a toast when the call came. Celeste felt her stomach twist. "There had been an explosion at one of our research facilities," he continued, his voice tight. "An act of sabotage. A rival company trying to steal our data. It was supposed to be a distraction, but something went wrong. His voice caught, just for a second. I was here, he whispered bitterly, raising a champagne glass while my family was. He stopped. The words refused to form. Without thinking, Celeste reached out and placed her hand over his on the railing. His skin was cold, but he didn't pull away. She spoke softly. That's why you push people away, why you test them so hard. Silas finally turned to face her. In the moonlight, she saw something raw in his expression, unfiltered pain, the kind he never allowed the world to see. The merger partner? She guessed. It was them, he confirmed. Someone I trusted. Someone I called a friend. After that, I learned something. His voice was steel now. Trust is a luxury I can't afford. Celeste swallowed past the tightness in her throat. But it's killing you inside, she whispered. Living without trust, without connection. That's not really living at all. Their eyes met, and for a single fragile moment, there were no titles, no walls, no pretense. Just him and her. Silas looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her. His hand shifted beneath hers. Their fingers intertwined, softly, instinctively, as if drawn together by something neither of them could control. His next words were barely audible. How do you do that? Do what? She asked, heart pounding. See through every wall I put up. Understand things I've never said. Celeste held his gaze. She had no idea where she found the courage, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. Maybe because I'm not trying to see the CEO of Everett Global. A small pause, then softer. I'm just seeing you, Silas. At the sound of his name on her lips, he inhaled sharply. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The laughter and music from the gala faded. The only thing that mattered was the connection forged in that quiet space, the understanding, the undeniable pull between them. And then, the moment shattered. A burst of laughter from inside jolted them back to reality. Silas let go of her hand, stepped back. The mask returned, slipping effortlessly into place. Without a word, he turned and walked inside. Celeste remained frozen for a second, her fingers still tingling where his hand had been. She took a breath, straightened her dress, and followed. They returned to the gala separately. But they both knew something had changed. The question was no longer whether they could maintain professional distance. It was whether they could survive the inevitable collision between their personal and professional worlds. The trip to Paris was supposed to be straightforward. 3 days of negotiations with French investors, standard contract reviews, then back to New York. But from the moment their private jet touched down at Charles de Gaulle Airport, Celeste felt it. Maybe it was the lingering effect of their conversation at the gala, or maybe it was simply being away from the carefully maintained boundaries of Everett Global. Whatever it was, something between them had shifted, and neither of them was ready for what came next. Whatever the reason, whether it was the shift that had begun at the gala, or simply the effect of being away from their usual environment, the careful distance between them started to crack. The first day of meetings went smoothly. Celeste's French was flawless, her ability to navigate the nuances of European business both precise and effortless. Silas found himself watching her more than he should, drawn to the ease with which she shifted between languages, the subtle confidence in her movements, the way her eyes sparked with quiet satisfaction whenever a negotiation turned in their favor. And she had a way of anticipating his needs before he even voiced them, translating just the right phrase, adjusting her tone when necessary, ensuring everything ran seamlessly. It was during a break between meetings when Thomas Laurent, one of the French executives, approached her. His interest was unmistakable. The charm in his voice, the way he leaned in ever so slightly, the touch of his hand on her arm as he complimented her translation skills, none of it could be mistaken as purely professional. From across the room, Silas watched. His fingers curled into his palm, his jaw tightened. Later, as they rode the elevator back to their rooms, he finally spoke. His voice was casual, controlled, but Celeste caught the undercurrent of tension beneath it. Mr. Laurent seems quite taken with you. She glanced at him, studying his reflection in the mirrored elevator walls. He's being typically French, she said lightly. All charm, no substance. Silas said nothing. But before he could respond, the elevator jolted violently, the sudden halt knocking them slightly off balance. The lights flickered once, twice. Then, darkness. Dim emergency lighting bathed the small space in an eerie blue glow. "Perfect," Silas muttered, pressing the emergency button. A crackling voice responded quickly, but the news wasn't good. A citywide power issue. The elevator wouldn't be moving for at least an hour. Celeste let out a slow breath, leaning against the wall. "Well, this is familiar." Silas glanced at her. "Though," she continued with a teasing tilt of her head, "last time I was the one intruding on your space." For a second, something almost like a smile touched his lips. "You do seem to have a habit of ending up in enclosed spaces with me." "At least you're fully dressed this time," she quipped, then immediately blushed. Sorry, that was inappropriate." "You apologize too much," he murmured, stepping closer. The elevator suddenly felt much smaller. Silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but charged, thick with unspoken words and moments that had always been almost something but never fully materialized. And then, quietly, she asked, "Why did it bother you?" Silas turned to her, his eyes sharp in the dim light. "What?" "The way Laurent was flirting with me. I saw your expression." He held her gaze, unreadable. Then, after a long pause, he finally said, "You know why." Her heart pounded. "Do I?" Silas took a step closer. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Close enough that the air between them seemed to pulse with something unspoken. "Ever since that day you walked into the spa," he murmured, "you've been breaking down every wall I've built." Celeste's breath caught. "And the most infuriating part," he continued, "you don't even seem to realize you're doing it." "Silas," she whispered. But he wasn't finished. "I tried to push you away, gave you impossible tasks, tested your limits, looked for any flaw, anything that would justify keeping my distance." His voice was low, raw, "but you kept proving me wrong. Every time." Celeste couldn't move, couldn't breathe. "And now?" He trailed off, his gaze dropping to her lips for the briefest second before finding her eyes again. "And now?" she whispered. Instead of answering, he reached up, tracing his fingers along her cheek. Celeste's breath stilled. This was Silas Everett, the man who never allowed himself to be vulnerable, who kept everyone at arm's length. Yet here he was, looking at her as if she was the first real thing he'd allowed himself to feel in years. "I haven't felt anything for anyone since I lost my family," he admitted, his voice barely above a breath. Celeste's chest tightened. "I didn't want to," he continued. "It was easier to be numb, to focus only on the company, to keep everyone at a distance." He exhaled sharply. "But you." He drew in a shaky breath as if saying the words out loud made them more real. "You make me want to feel again." His fingers tightened slightly against her skin. "And that terrifies me." Celeste lifted her own hand, covering his, pressing his palm against her cheek. "Being afraid of feeling," she whispered, "doesn't mean you stop feeling." She could feel his pulse beneath her fingertips, fast, unsteady, just like hers. And in that moment, trapped in the dim glow of the elevator with nowhere to run and no distractions to hide behind, they weren't CEO and employee anymore. They were just two people standing on the edge of something neither of them could ignore. And neither of them knew what would happen if they fell. It means you're brave enough to recognize what you're risking. The space between them seemed to disappear. Silas's free hand slid to Celeste's waist, pulling her closer. Her fingers curled into the lapels of his suit jacket, gripping tightly. They were breathing the same air. Their heartbeats, one rhythm, one pulse. But before either of them could cross that final, irreversible line, everything changed. The merger negotiations were supposed to be routine. Everett Global was in the final stages of acquiring a smaller tech company, and the process had been running smoothly. At least that's how it seemed. But as Celeste sat beside Silas in the sleek conference room, listening carefully, something felt off. Across the table, Richard Morrison, the CEO of the smaller company, wore a smirk that didn't quite match the conversation. A flicker of something too smug, too confident lingered in his expression as the discussion progressed. Normally, Celeste wouldn't have thought much of it. But there was a pattern, one she couldn't ignore. After their night in Paris, everything between her and Silas had shifted. They maintained a strict professionalism in public, but subtle glances, fleeting touches, the unspoken awareness between them spoke volumes. And today, that connection would prove more valuable than either of them could have imagined. Morrison's company financials were being reviewed when Celeste spotted it, a phrase in the German correspondence that made her blood run cold. She had spent the past week translating countless documents, and certain words kept appearing in different languages. Innocuous to most, but not if you knew what to look for. Keeping her expression neutral, she carefully passed a note to Silas. Need to speak privately. Urgent. He didn't react immediately, didn't let his face betray anything, but moments later he called for a recess. In Silas's private office, Celeste spread the documents across his desk, her hands slightly trembling. The coding in these contracts, she said, pointing to specific phrases, they match what investigators found 5 years ago. The ones from, she hesitated, knowing the weight of her next words, the ones from the merger that, Silas's expression darkened. The ones that killed my family. He finished, his voice tight. Celeste forced herself to meet his gaze. Yes, she took a breath. Morrison's company, it's a shell corporation. The same people who were behind the sabotage 5 years ago. They've been waiting for the right moment. For a second, Silas looked staggered, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. Then his expression hardened into fury. They've been planning this for years, he muttered. His jaw clenched, and in a sudden burst of frustration, he slammed his fist onto the desk. I should have seen it. Celeste reached for his arm, a steadying touch. You couldn't have known, she said gently. But we can stop them now. Silas turned toward her, really looking at her. Something in his expression shifted. We? Yes, we. She squeezed his hand. You're not alone anymore, Silas. A beat of silence. Then determination replaced anger in his eyes. What's the plan? When they returned to the conference room, everything had changed. The same conversation resumed, but this time Celeste's translations were deliberate. As she interpreted Silas's words into multiple languages for the international investors, she wove in carefully chosen phrases that subtly highlighted the hidden meanings buried within Morrison's documents. At first, Morrison didn't notice, but then the investors did. Quiet murmurs spread around the table as they recognized the coded patterns in the contracts, subtle but unmistakable. Morrison's smirk faltered. Across the table, Silas leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Something wrong, Mr. Morrison? He asked smoothly. You look uncomfortable. Morrison's fingers tightened around his pen. You have no proof of anything, he said through clenched teeth. Celeste simply slid a thick stack of translated documents toward him. Actually, she said, her voice calm but firm, we have proof in 6 different languages. She met his eyes. Every coded message, every hidden clause, every connection to the shell companies involved in the incident 5 years ago. Silence. Then, chaos erupted. The investors turned on Morrison, demanding explanations. Security stepped in before he could make a quick exit. And behind the scenes, the authorities, who had been discreetly notified hours earlier, were waiting. Hours later, when the dust had settled and the statements had been given, Silas found her. Celeste stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out at the city lights, the adrenaline still thrumming beneath her skin. She heard his footsteps behind her. Then, his voice, low and certain, You saved my company today. She turned to face him. We saved it. A beat passed. Silas reached for her hand, not like before, this time deliberately. His fingers brushed against hers, testing the space between them. She didn't pull away, neither did he. For the first time since they met, nothing stood between them. No walls, no masks, no distance. Just the undeniable truth neither of them could ignore anymore. And this time, neither of them wanted to. Silas found Celeste still in her office, surrounded by neatly stacked files, the final pieces of evidence being prepared for the investigation. The room was quiet, save for the distant hum of the city beyond the glass windows. She didn't look up right away, too focused on her work. But when she sensed his presence, she finally turned. You saved my company, he said quietly, closing the door behind him. Celeste held his gaze. I saved more than that, she murmured. I saved you, from letting them hurt you again. Silas crossed the room in 3 strides, and this time, he didn't hesitate. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and before she could say another word, his lips found hers. The kiss was fierce, filled with all the emotions he had spent so long suppressing. Gratitude, admiration, and something much deeper. Celeste melted into him, her fingers gripping the fabric of his shirt, anchoring herself in this moment, in this new reality where there were no more walls, no more distance. When they finally broke apart, Silas rested his forehead against hers, breathing her in. "When you first walked into that spa," he murmured, "I thought you were going to be nothing but trouble." A soft laugh escaped her. "I was the best kind of trouble." His expression grew serious. "I spent 5 years building walls," he admitted, convinced that letting anyone in would only lead to more pain. "But you didn't try to break them down." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing gentle circles against her skin. "You just showed me that it was safe to open the door." Celeste's heart pounded. "And now?" she whispered. "Now I'm done hiding." His voice was steady, sure, unshaken, done being afraid to feel. His hands tightened slightly as if grounding himself in her presence. "I love you, Celeste Harrington, not just for saving my company, but for saving me." A sharp breath caught in her throat. "For showing me that trust isn't a weakness," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "That love is worth the risk." Tears shimmered in her eyes. "I love you too," she whispered back. "All of you. The CEO. The wounded man. The person you're becoming." She smiled softly, brushing a hand against his cheek. "The one who isn't afraid to feel anymore." Silas closed his eyes briefly, as if letting her words settle deep within him. And when he opened them again, the last of his walls were gone. Silas pulled Celeste into his arms again, holding her close, not out of fear, not out of hesitation, but because he finally knew what it meant to trust, to love, to let someone in. This wasn't the end of their story. It was just the beginning. Thank you for joining us on this journey, a story of resilience, trust, and the courage to love again. We hope it touched your heart, made you feel something deep within, and reminded you that even the most guarded souls can find their way back to connection. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us and allows us to continue bringing you heartfelt, inspiring stories. Leave a comment below. What was your favorite moment? What emotions did this story stir in you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Follow us for more. Stay tuned for more stories that move, heal, and inspire. Until next time, keep believing in the power of stories and the magic of human connection.